It is.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so welcome everybody. And as Yvette said, wishing you all a happy new year. And let's get cracking with Unit 9. So as we know, just to put this into context, because we've been working through all the other units, and we're now up to Unit 9. So that's flown by, hasn't it? When you think about the nine, nine different
Mm.
units. Sorry, getting all these notifications on email and just getting rid of them. Okay, so Unit 9, Understanding Play for Learning and Holistic Development. And for me, along with that Unit 2 that is all about holistic development, play and learning is at the core of everything, and it's really difficult to separate those. I know when we looked at Unit 2, we perhaps were linking in aspects of Unit 9, and this is something that you can look at these units holistically, as you know. But when you think about Unit 2, which is all around holistic development, and you're looking now at Unit 9, which is all about understanding play, there's bound to be some sort of linkage that you can find that will grab those two and bring them together. But I want to look at Unit 9 in its discrete isolation this morning because it is a very, very important area, as we know, and one that's underestimated and undervalued, I think, by everybody, not by play professionals, and certainly not by early years professionals. We absolutely understand and value it, but I think it loses some sort of, I don't know, some sort of strength within how we hold play and learning, and the fact that actually if young children didn't play, then they wouldn't have the tools, they wouldn't have the disposition to go on to learning. It's all about that extension of play for learning, and I think that's something that we know is undervalued in society, I think. So there are some theories that we're going to look at today, and I've put some links on this PowerPoint so that you can explore those further if you wish, or you could share those out with your learners as well so that they can get a greater, deeper understanding of play as a real theoretical base of knowledge. So that's what we're going to do. We know that it's part of this qualification. Doesn't want me to just click on the slides. I've got to do this. And this is how it fits in the context of the whole qualification as a whole. So I want to look at Unit 9, and as we look there, we can see that it's got a real good sort of 10 credit. It's a meaty unit, 92 guided learning hours. Now, these are only recommended, so if you're teaching this holistically, you're playing with these guided learning hours as long as you're covering that teaching and delivery sufficiently to allow each student that knowledge and understanding. It's absolutely fine. It says include 30 work placement hours, but again, you're not doing that in isolation. We're teaching this unit, off you go for 30 hours. You're going to be using that recommended 300 to 350 placement hours anyway, and a lot of your students will probably do more, especially if they're working. So it starts off there with that meaty one, summarise theories and philosophical approaches around play for babies and children's development. So straight away, we're bringing two things together. We're looking at babies and children's development, and if you've been working through the units, then Unit 2 will have been something that you'll have covered almost straight away, and maybe something that goes on throughout the qualification. I think no matter which unit you're teaching, you're always going to go back to child development. It depends on the factors that impact. What are the typical stages and patterns of development for children, and how might that then work with the context of the other units? So it's the core of what we do. But straight away we're framing it, which I quite like, in terms of play and theory, which we don't often do outside of our field of study. So when we think about theories, I wrote down so that we didn't have to keep going up and down on the slides, but it asks us to look at people like Wendy Russell and Stuart Lester, and these are people that might be quite contemporary in terms of, we tend to think of Froebel, Montessori, Steiner, Macmillan as the philosophical approaches, and that's fine. But when it comes to play, Tina Bruce we've got in there. Janet Moyles you might want to look at. There are so many, but I just wanted to throw in a couple of contemporary ones. So Wendy Russell and the late Stuart Lester, sadly, but they look and they take the play cycle, compound flexibility. They look at play for a change in one of the books that they wrote together. So I've put a link on there, so don't be worried about making any notes or anything like that. But those two people in particular have got some really interesting things to say around play. So just some new people. Corinne and John Hutt are also interesting, but the ones that are actually listed in the qualification are Wendy Russell, Stuart Lester, and then later on when we look at play types in 4.1, we're bringing in those 16 areas or types of play from Bob Hughes and the 12 features of play from Tina Bruce. So it brings that theoretical, and you could almost teach 1.1 and 4.1 together. And it's bringing that sort of play isn't just something that we do with children that hasn't been researched. There's a whole, as you know, there's so much research around play. So it's making play serious and a serious business for our early years professionals. And I think that, again, is what makes us advocates for play in terms of the role that we do with young children. So we're looking at those theories. We're summarising those theories. Now, to be able to summarise theories and philosophical approaches, you need to know a little bit about them. So how much are we expecting our students to know? We're expecting them to know those key points. What key points did those people bring? What are they advocating for? How have they changed the way that we view play with babies and children? So are there any key theories? And the links that I've popped on at the end of the presentation will give you sort of an overview of that. When it comes to theories, and I will get past 1.1, I promise, but when it comes to theories, I think, again, I wrote down some of these things because I didn't want to miss them out. We're thinking about the play cycle, and these are all mentioned in the links, but thinking about the play cycle, and that's Gordon Sturrock and Perry Else. Again, sadly, the late Perry Else, but you can look at those in the Colorado paper, and that's about the importance of the different stages within the play cycle and how children may use play, because we tend to look at maybe Piaget or Mildred Parton and those stages of play, solitary, parallel, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is not wrong. That can be brought in, but there are other theories that we can weave into that are more sort of play work or play worker orientated. Vivette, Kay's just tried to join a holding call for me. I don't know if you can send her the link to this one, Kay Webber, if you can. Otherwise, it's fine.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So the play cycle and Gordon Sturrock and Perry Else, very, very interesting for students to look at and to see how students use play. We can also think about the playwork principles, and there are 8 very strong playwork principles that you can explore with your students or ask them to look at and to interpret. So again, we're looking not just at sort of because what we tend to do, I think, when we're introducing play is look at the stages of development and think about how we can promote that as an early years practitioner. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's critical. But now we're taking that step back and thinking, well, what play, what kind of play, and what are we actually trying to achieve? So play cycle, play work principles, and then exploring a theory that was introduced by Fraser Brown, and that's called compound flexibility. Now, compound flexibility is absolutely something that we all do as early years professionals. Classic example, it's hailstoning outside, so no matter what you're doing, wow, what's that noise? Let's go and have a look. Let's go and splash in the puddles because it's been raining really hard. So that spontaneity that comes with the environment changing is very, very important. Now, Fraser Brown looked into that and was talking about things called compound flexibility, exploring the fact that actually we say that play builds confidence, it builds all of those social skills, it allows for emotional release and so on, and regulation. But it does more than that, according to Fraser Brown. It does something around the flexibility. So it's the way that we are agile within our play and agile within our curriculum that allows children to be able to build that resilience. They are adapting, and it's that process of sometimes painful, challenging adaptation that helps that child to grow. So it's a really interesting theory. So that might be something, again, that brings something a little bit different. And there are videos on that, and there are articles that you can share with your students and so on. So all of those will widen and give you a little bit of something different to talk about when it comes to the play. Right, okay, just getting rid of all of that. Honestly, there's so many notifications, I don't know how to turn them off anyway. I keep ignoring them. I hope you can't see them and it's not distracting. Okay, so as we move on to 1.2, so you're spending a lot of time on understanding play and theory. That is critical. And then we're outlining the rights of children in relation to play. So, and that gives you the scope to talk about when might play be interrupted for babies and children, and how might that impact them. And again, you can talk about conflict, you can talk about transition, you can talk about factors that are happening in a child's personal life that might be hopefully very short term, but again, that interruption of play. Hospital is a good example of that, and the introduction of the hospital play therapist and so on, and the importance of continuity of play within a child's life. And one of the first things that will happen in a displacement camp, for example, will be, let's create something for the children, let's create an area of play. And it's not just for occupation, it's to actually make sure there is a continuity in their development, in their life, in the way that they can come to terms with what's happening, just as it would be if circumstances were more acceptable, shall we say. So again, you can look at it from a range of different perspectives and make it important and make it a little bit different. So when we think about the significance of play, this is when we can really make those strong links with the other units, with Unit 2 in particular, because we're thinking about that innate desire to play, that sort of built the baby's curious, the sensory learning, and bringing all of the theory that you might have looked at in Unit 2 together in terms of children naturally want to find out about the world around them. This is play, this is interaction. So interaction, high quality interaction and play should be seamless, and the importance of that in terms of how you respond to that. And that's where you could have that real strong discussion around, and you could have this as a hypothesis: babies don't do anything. I used to hear that an awful lot, and I know we might have talked about that before. Don't put me in the baby room, Janet. They don't do anything. Help. Because this is absolutely where everything is happening, where you are laying down that foundation to enable for that independent play and that sort of bringing together of all of those different areas of development and so on. So that innate desire, that drive to play, where it's seen in babies, what does that look like? What does that mean? And how babies can be involved in play and be in sustained play. So thinking there about the treasure baskets, for example, and the exploration. So where you might, we call it adulteration, don't we, with older children and young people, where you might back off from the play, where you can absorb learnings through that child's independent, autonomous play. Here, we're sort of making sure we're creating that enabling environment and being part of it, making sure those high quality interactions are taking place. So that's really important there. And where you might be encouraging the let's back off, here you're encouraging those high interactions, but taking your play cues as well. That one doesn't want to go, does it? Right, use examples to explain how play influences learning and holistic development for children. And I think that's where you can then think about, okay, I understand play. I understand some of that theory and some of that grounding and some of the background that's gone into play. I've learned about these different theorists and how they are impacting. I know about the different types of play or the different approaches and philosophical views on play. I'm now going to think about my typical child, my typical baby, my typical developmental stages and patterns of normative development, and I'm going to think about how I'm going to use play opportunities and experiences and why. And maybe, the book standard charts that we use that are fantastic at being able to do that, but maybe with some discussion around, could that link to any of the theories? How might children use that play? How might that fit in with some of the views of the theorists that we've talked about or the philosophical approaches that we've explored? So making that a sort of holistic way of assessing and looking at learning outcome 1, for example. So you could teach learning outcome 1 and 2 together, and then maybe have some sort of assessment task that combines them all and use your chart as a basis for that, perhaps. That's a really nice, straightforward thing for students to do, but then explore it a little bit further in terms of why. So I didn't just jump then, did I? Yeah, thought I did.
We just missed 3.
Yeah. That's done a double take. So describing how babies and children's plays needs and preferences change in relation to their interests and stage of development. So you can see how this is nicely flowing, and again lending itself to, and there is a non-mandatory task that you can use, but you can adapt that as well. Bit of compound flexibility. You can adapt that to your students' needs and how best it might fit their actual context and their learning. So thinking about what stage of play, what's important to that child or that baby, what's going on. We're always wanting to be child-centered, and that's really important. So how do we do that? How do we know what a child's interest is, what their stage of development is? Linking it maybe to observation and and Unit 8, for example. And then thinking, okay, this is what these are the experiences that I'm going to use. And actually, I need to be aware that sometimes children might be bored with that, or children might they might be at an age where they can choose their own play and direct their own play. And I need to watch out for interests and recognize that actually something may be going on in a child's personal life, their circumstances, and what about their stage of development? Is this experience going to be something that extends their play, or is it going to be something that's going to be too challenging and so they'll lose interest very quickly, or is it going to be something that is more repetition and we need to move on and extend their learning and scaffold their learning so that we're bringing in new experiences as well? So it's thinking about that planning as well as thinking about how things change when a child grows, much more holistically about their development in terms of how that can impact what's going on in terms of the play preferences that they may have. But I think sometimes we're very much in an adult directed, we're going to have this. We know that children like this. We talk about continuous provision and always having this, and this available, and how flexible and agile are we in terms of allowing the children to make their own choices? Are we always putting out those firm favourites? How can we make things a little bit more interesting? And how could we, if somebody walked through and said, how is that activity going to be really beneficial for Janet? Do we know? And asking ourselves that will help us to think, actually, well, it would be if I put this with that activity, or if actually I just put this little doll here, or this little car here, then actually I think Janet would really like it because she seems to like playing with the cars and the train tracks and things like that. So making sure and just reflecting and asking your students to think, do you know why you've put things out there? And is it because you want to reflect different types of play? or is it because you want to reflect different types of play for the children that are your key children? And being able to explain why you've chosen what you've chosen in relation to each child is a good way of reflecting on that and testing that. By the way, if you do have any questions, please do interrupt me. I usually say that at the beginning, but I've just gone for it. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions or to pop anything in the chat. So learning outcome 4, this is where you're really thinking and the different types. So we've got Bob Hughes there and the 16 different types of play. Again, there's a link to that in a moment, and we can have a look at that. And also Tina Bruce and those 12 features of quality play. Now, this is also a really good opportunity for students to start reflecting. So we're thinking about different types of play. Let's understand what Bob Hughes brought in his taxonomy of play, and we're thinking about those 12 features of quality play as described by Tina Bruce, and anybody else that you want to bring in. But as I say, those are the 2 that are listed in the qualification. So what you could do is maybe ask students to reflect what's going on in your environment. So you could link what we've just been considering in learning outcome 3 with this, where we're thinking about the benefits of providing that environment rich in play. Really important. And you could start evaluating the environment. How agile are you? Do you stick to what you've planned, or are you able to go with the flow? Do you find that challenging to be able to switch from one thing to the other? Are you spontaneous and a real rich advocate for play, or honestly, do you find that difficult? So there are lots of things that you can discuss in there when you're talking about the benefits of providing an environment rich in play. And then there are other theories or other papers that you can look at. So something that's just come out in England is the one by Professor Campbell Barr for it's called It Is Rocket Science, and she's talking about the importance of that quality interaction between the early years professional and the child, the baby and the child. So that's interesting in terms of high qualifications, the level of training and understanding, and that professionalization and being a professional. So that's the difference, whereby we could just look at, oh, this is age appropriate, let's pop that out, but without the background of being able to say why you're doing what you're doing and how that links to learning, then that's what makes a difference between somebody who's just randomly selecting equipment and somebody who's selecting that equipment with a purpose. There used to be a book back in the day called Play with a Purpose. I can't remember who wrote that, but again, that was talking about the importance of making sure, not necessarily that everything had to have a learning outcome. I'm not suggesting that by any means. In fact, quite the opposite. But the process of play is what helps build that disposition for learning. And without that, and this is what we tend to be seeing in some of our nurseries, that children are going to nursery and starting nursery without that confidence. Now, we've had many interruptions in development, and I understand that. Not COVID being one of them, but they were still seeing the sort of backlash of that, if you like, in terms of, are our children ready? Now, school is not often ready to receive our children, and our children therefore are not at a position, but there's been more and more children who are lacking that confidence at a younger age when they go to nursery. So thinking about compound flexibility, thinking about what Fraser Brown was saying in terms of let's build resilience, let's build confidence, is quite important. So you can bring things together here. And then the benefits of outdoor play provision for babies and children's learning and development. Let's explore what we mean by outdoor play. Not everybody's got a rich outdoor play provision, and that's something that we need to acknowledge and appreciate. So what sorts of experiences outdoors can we provide for our babies and children? What's the learning opportunities of simply going for a walk? What's the learning opportunities of simply being outside for both physical and emotional health? And then maybe bringing in some approaches like the forest school, for example, and thinking about case studies, and then reflecting again and evaluating our own environments and how we engage in outdoor learning. And we talk then about free flow. So if you have got that wonderful opportunity to play outdoors, how is that arranged? What do we mean by that by that free flow environment? Analysing benefits. So what difference does it make? Why do we do it? And those quality interactions that also take place when children are outdoors just makes you feel different. I think. Do we breathe differently when we go out? There's things that a practitioner can think about. How do we feel when we go outside? How does it make us? Does it make us relax? Does it make us more anxious? Does it make us breathe differently? Does it make us think that it's not as rigid? Are we able to sort of coat on, hands in pockets? Does it feel more relaxed? And so exploring that. And for some people, it might be the absolute opposite in terms of safety aspects. It might really put fear into some people. So again, evaluating that and analysing that against the benefits just makes it a wider conversation. So explaining the role of the early years educator when providing an inclusive play environment. Now, we've talked about inclusivity before, and we've talked about that as a sort of a sense that you feel an inclusive play environment. How do we enable that? How do we enable all children to contribute and to participate? This goes for staff as well. How are we creating an inclusive environment so that everybody can be advocates of play from an adult perspective, and that everybody feels safe, that everybody feels secure, psychological safety within our play environment, from an adult point of view, and then also how we approach play with the babies and young children, absolutely critical. So thinking about that, thinking about the challenges to creating an inclusive play environment can also be discussed. And how do we approach this with parents? So we might have a very open door policy and just say, well, parents know that they can come and they can make appointments, or they can stay as long as they want to stay within the play environment. We have a strong open door policy. That's fine for parents who will take advantage of it, and absolutely it's a good thing. It might be the parents that are a little bit more hesitant, who are keen to drop off their children in the morning and will really want to not engage at the end of the session. These parents perhaps are not feeling that sense of inclusivity for lots and lots and lots of reasons, and it's usually down to that resilience and that confidence, and that I don't feel able to connect, and that can come across. That's an anxiety, and that anxiety can show itself in many ways. And I think, I just need to message this person. Sorry. 2 seconds, or else he'll start a meeting.
That's okay.
So I do apologise. That should satisfy Ben. Okay, so explaining the role of the early years educator, that inclusive play environment, not just around inclusivity in terms of SEND, but in terms of how does this environment feel? Do I feel able to participate, to be able to contribute? Do I feel psychologically safe? Is this a safe space? And that goes for the adults as well as the babies and children. And we were just talking about anxiety within parents. So open door policy, great, but you're waiting for parents to take advantage of that. And I think sometimes it's that anxious parent who can sometimes be ignored, because not purposely, but actually they might feel extremely anxious, extremely finding it extremely difficult to make that connection. They may have had different experiences that have affected their sense of value and worth, and actually they're not able to make that connection. And I would say for students who are seeing that in some parents, then it's kind of it's something we don't rush, but it's something that we don't ignore. So inclusivity can be brought to them in very simple ways in terms of, yes, the open door policy, yes, the newsletters, or any other way that we communicate with our evolving technologies these days, but also the smile, the nod, the insistence of, I just need to tell you before you rush off, Janet. I just need to tell you about what Sam did today at nursery. She did this, and this. We laughed so much. And then you're actually, you might get a smile, you might get a nod, you might be able to get some kind of reaction. Oh, yeah, she's always doing that at home, drives me mad. Oh, it's so funny, isn't it? And you're making that connection. So you don't give up, but you don't rush it. So I think sometimes bringing little case studies and scenarios that talk about inclusivity and in its widest span is really, really important as well. So here we go with our skills. So we are planning, leading and evaluating opportunities in an early years setting. So again, we're leading and evaluating 6 experiences with babies and children. A minimum of 1 play experience must be carried out in an outdoor environment. So we're bringing that outdoor environment in again, and we're reviewing 1 learning experience with those theoretical perspectives and the philosophical approaches. And we are recognizing how that play activity has supported the developmental stage of the babies or children that we're working with in this particular case, how we've met their needs, and how we've responded to their evolving interests and their preferences. So it's what we were talking about before. And if we have many opportunities where you're thinking about planning, leading, and evaluating experiences, 6 experiences is your optimal that you're going for here. But you could also have opportunities where people are discussing and sharing what they do as part of their practice. So you might not necessarily be writing them all up, but you might have many discussions where you are talking about what you do, because you'll plan, lead, and evaluate 6 experiences in a day with young children because of that spontaneity of activities. But you're thinking about that and you're recording things as a minimum of 6. But if you had sessions where you were verbally discussing and having open discussions, or an online forum where you're talking about the different activities that you do with children, you're sharing all of those that wide knowledge and those different activities and experiences, but you're also then preparing, and you're becoming, or your students are becoming, more confident in how they can address 6.2. And again, that's something that might lead out of Unit 8 when you're doing the observations, and you might want to think about, right, okay, I've got to do, is it 10 observations? So I'm going to use in my next steps, I'm going to tie that into this. That might be tricky, I don't know, because you're doing things to your own teaching and delivery approaches and what works best for you and your cohort of students. But there are ways, again, of making this part of a bigger package, if you like, or a more holistic one anyway. And then we've talked about this inclusivity. We've just talked about that at length, really, about supporting children's participation. And I think it's really important that we're not just sort of having, that's how we might measure the impact. Did all of our children get something out of it? Did I get something out of it as a professional that's going to help me? What was the level of participation? Janet didn't like this. She was extremely bored with this. Okay, I'll bear that in mind, and we need to maybe make sure there's something else there. Am I forcing children to stay with an activity just because I want to see it finished? So I want to measure the impact and the success of it. How how am I looking at this? So children's participation in planned and unplanned play experiences will tell you a lot about their needs, about their interests, and about what's going on within their own sort of child-centered play development. And again, constantly reflecting on that because it evolves, and what we think might be really of real interest one day, the next day it's kind of, oh, put those out and I've made those available for self-directed play, and actually there was no interest. So it's being mindful and thinking again always of that compound flexibility. How are we using the environment around us to actually engage in play, which is an interesting concept, and it probably works better when we think about the outside elements and we think about the weather. Everybody stops what they're doing when it snows. Everybody stops what they're doing when we can go outside and splash in puddles. Everybody wants to go on a picnic when the weather improves. The weather really does control a lot of what we do from an outdoor environment point of view. What's going on in your indoor environment? What sort of environment are you creating? So I find that really interesting. And then we are applying theoretical perspectives, philosophical approaches, and those are things that you could bring in with 6.2 and 6.1, where you're thinking about those. When you plan, lead, and evaluate the activities, there's opportunities to bring 8.1 into that, because you are going to have to, for one of your activities at least, think about how they are associated with theory and how they can be backed up with those perspectives and philosophical approaches. And again, if in the learning side of these particular assessment criteria, you've thought about how your environment, you've reflected on your own environment, your students' environment in the nurseries in terms of the theory and those key areas that they're bringing and the philosophical approaches. If you've done a sound evaluation, then students will really understand and be able to sort of signpost and pinpoint, yeah, this happens. I know why we do it for development. Now I know how it fits alongside some of the theory, perhaps, or some of the philosophy, perhaps, and they can bring that together with confidence rather than just writing about something because they have to, and people will just talk about scaffolding, perhaps. So making real connections rather than forced connections. And then the rest of the slide just reminds us of things that we've touched upon now in the context of where they've appeared in the learning outcomes throughout this particular unit. And then these are the links that I've popped on here. Now, this is not exhaustive, and there are many more that you can find. But these things here will take you through. We talked about, when you're talking about learning outcome 1 and really trying to emphasize or create that understanding of play is not an easy thing to understand. It's a serious thing to understand. When we introduce development and we look at the theory associated with that, when we look at the theory and the pedagogical approaches associated with learning, it's serious. This is also serious, and I think that's an important thing. You know that, but it's an important thing to get across to your students. So thinking about the play work principles, and there's a couple of links to things there, and compound flexibility, and that's just one example, many more, but that's Fraser Brown's. I just wanted to give you the name, and the play cycle is there, and the different approaches to the play cycle. Play types is there as well, and then there's a PowerPoint presentation. There's something there that looks at Tina Bruce as well. So you've got things there that you can explore, that you can use as part of your teaching and learning, but all of those things on there, you're probably going to be able to find examples of short video clips and things like that, something in an illustration when it comes to the principles and the cycle for play. That's something that's quite interesting. That'll be quite interesting for you to share with your students as well. So I think a lot of it will fall out of development and bringing all of that together, and what's new and what can be brought in that's new and interesting, rather than just saying we know how children develop, so therefore we know how they play. You can make that play a little bit more serious by thinking about the theory and the philosophical approaches. And really, I think we are there, because then we've got the rest of the slides that talk about the qualification that isn't that new anymore about working with babies and under twos, but I just leave that on the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you to see if there are any questions or any thoughts.